If you're a postmenopausal woman with early breast cancer, you may have been treated with an aromatase inhibitor. This was proven to be the most effective treatment for endocrine responsive early breast cancer through the Big 198 clinical trial. Clinical trials are designed to find out if new treatments or prevention strategies are more effective than those currently accepted as best available standard treatment. We sat down with the chair of the Breast Cancer Trials Scientific Advisory Committee, Associate Professor Prue Francis, to discuss how Big 198 helped to stop breast cancer returning and improve survival rates for some women.
So Big 198 was a pivotal trial, and it was studying postmenopausal women with early breast cancer that was hormone receptor positive, so estrogen receptor positive. And what it was looking at is, for these women, the standard hormonal therapy at the time was to take tablets with tamoxifen for 5 years, and the Big 198 was comparing aromatase and aromatase inhibitor called letrozole for 5 years as compared to tamoxifen for 5 years, with the hypothesis that letrozole, the aromatase inhibitor, might be more effective. And it was also comparing two other strategies, which was to give the first couple of years with letrozole and then the remaining 3 years with tamoxifen, or vice versa, the first couple of years with tamoxifen and then switching to the letrozole. So it had actually 4 different ways of delivering the oral hormones. And the trial was an important trial in the early results of the trial, indicating that overall, that letrozole appeared to be a more effective treatment than tamoxifen for women with postmenopausal estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. But that's not to say, I suppose, that every postmenopausal woman with breast cancer needs an aromatase inhibitor, because there are some women that have relatively good prognosis postmenopausal breast cancer who would probably do equally well in terms of their long-term, cure rate, regardless of whether they got tamoxifen or an aromatase inhibitor like letrozole. But for women who have a higher risk situation, the difference between a more effective therapy like letrozole and than tamoxifen could be really quite important.
So did it change practice around the world?
So it was in, the Big 198 trial, and in conjunction with another trial that was conducted with another aromatase inhibitor called the ATTACK trial, which studied anastrozole. Those 2 trials, I think, were quite pivotal in shifting the standard of care for postmenopausal women with early hormone receptor positive breast cancer. And so nowadays it would be more common for these women to be treated with a aromatase inhibitor hormone therapy than tamoxifen.
So there has been a 10-year follow-up. What results did that produce?
So one of the things that's complicated about the Big 198 trial was that there was a crossover that happened during the trial, because as the trial was being conducted and women were receiving their planned therapy, of their hormonal therapy, the early results of trials were becoming available, which showed that aromatase inhibitors appeared to be more effective. And when those early results became available, those running the trial then recommended that the women who were randomised in the trial to receive the 5 years of standard therapy with tamoxifen should have the option to cross over to letrozole, which was being shown to be a more effective option. So in fact, the long-term results of the trial became more complicated, because in fact they weren't a direct comparison, for example, of 5 years of letrozole to 5 years of tamoxifen. They were a comparison of 5 years of letrozole to some women who got 5 years of tamoxifen, but some who actually started out with their 5 years of tamoxifen, but along the way then were swapped over to letrozole once the early data became available.
So you've removed that placebo group?
Well, there was not not a placebo, the control group actually sort of shifted somewhat in what they were getting. And so I suppose that's one of the things about clinical trials. When we conduct clinical trials, there is monitoring of the trial by independent committees as well as the trial committee to try and look at whether the ongoing treatments in the trial are still appropriate to continue studying, and along the way it was deemed that there was enough information to notify the doctors and the women participating in the trial that it should be an option for the people in the control group to no longer remain on their control treatment, tamoxifen, should they wish to switch.
I guess that's quite reassuring to tell potential clinical trial participants that if you are on the placebo but it's proving the new treatment is doing very well, we will switch you. Is that something that clinical trial participants get told?
Yeah, so usually in a consent form for a clinical trial, it will talk about the fact that, if there is newer information that becomes available, and that's considered good practice in clinical trials. All the trials that breast cancer trials participates in, they have a trial steering committee who are involved in the trial, but we also have for all our trials what's called an independent data monitoring committee who are overseeing the trial and are not involved in running the trial, and they will look objectively at what information is happening to ensure that it is appropriate that the women on the control arm treatments are still appropriate to continue those treatments. So I think, yes, from that perspective, it is reassuring that sometimes if new information becomes available during the lifetime of a trial, that this, is brought out for all the participants. And there's been other examples of trials where crossover has occurred. The HERA trial that the group participated in, which was one of the pivotal trials that showed that adjuvant trastuzumab, sometimes referred to as Herceptin, could improve, survival and reduce relapse rates in HER2-positive early breast cancer. And there were women in the HERA trial who were in the control group, and in that trial, the control group was your standard chemotherapy and hormone therapy with no trastuzumab, no Herceptin, and those women were subsequently offered a crossover, and if they wished to receive Herceptin. But it does make the long-term follow-up results of trials complex if there's been a crossover, because potentially it can dilute the improvement that might have been seen otherwise. But one of the things with breast cancer trials is they often have a very long natural history, and so we will be following women usually for at least 10 years and sometimes longer, and so sometimes there is newer information that might become available either from the trial itself or from other trials that sometimes requires a change in what is considered appropriate for the control group.
That was Associate Professor Prue Francis, the chair of the Breast Cancer Trials Scientific Advisory Committee. If you'd like to find out more about breast cancer trials and how you can support our life-saving research, visit breastcancertrials.org.au. To keep up to date about the latest breast cancer research, stories and breast cancer trials activity, subscribe to the Breast Cancer Trials podcast and follow us on social media. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover on the Breast Cancer Trials podcast, get in touch with us on social media. And if you have found this podcast interesting, make sure you tell those in your support circles to tune in.